Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll just give everyone a minute or two to come through, but very excited to talk to you today about skills and how we move forwards towards a decarbonised concrete sector. So thank you again for your time. We've got some fabulous speakers for you online today. Really looking forward to introducing those to you. Yeah, so it looks like we've got a few people coming in now. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. So we'll kick off the proceedings. I am Claire Tubeletz. I'm the CEO of the Smartcrete Cooperative Research Centre, and it has been such a pleasure working with the concrete sector over the last few years to understand and dive into pathways towards decarbonisation. It's been fabulous to see this sector really grapple with what those barriers are and how we can work together to really facilitate the enablers of decarbonisation and sustainability. I'm very pleased to be joining you today in Melbourne from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Smartcrete really is very pleased to pay respects to elders past and present. There has been some absolutely wild weather here in Melbourne over the last couple of days, but I can tell you today is beautiful, sunny, a little bit cold. And interestingly, I was Googling the Indigenous seasons recently and found that in Melbourne here, there are apparently 7 seasons. It doesn't say anything about the wild weather, but apparently we are right between wombat season and orchid season at the moment. And the thing to look out for in Melbourne apparently is it's almost kookaburra mating season. So hopefully that's something that those of you who are in Melbourne will enjoy, hearing their laughter. But thinking about the Indigenous people and thinking about the way that they tell stories and pass knowledge down to new generations, I think is a really nice way for us to frame our conversation today, which is about how we can work together to ensure that knowledge is transferred really effectively across the supply chain to facilitate pathways towards sustainability. And today what we're going to be talking about is a really critical part of the supply chain, which is our trades people, the tradies. And the real question is, as the people that are on the ground really delivering the impact of our sustainability plans, how do we effectively bring them on board in terms of the pathways to sustainability? So I'm really pleased that we've got a fabulous group of people here to help share their insights in pathways towards greater skills and knowledge transfer across the supply chain. The first person that I'm excited to introduce you to is an intern that has been working with Smartcrete for the last 3-4 months. He's been a fabulous member of our team. He joins us from Macquarie University. And he has been looking into a research project analysing all of the training programs that are available in Australia. So Jack Hewitt, over to you. It's been wonderful working with you and we're excited to see the outcome of your research.
Hello, everyone. So unfortunately, I can't share the presentation at the moment, but I can go through it.
Let me fix that for you. Sorry, I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
Good to go.
Okay. It is not allowing me to share screen. Unfortunate, but I will just continue with my presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be discussing the current recruitment and training environment across Australia, looking at the gaps and opportunities throughout the industry. Just as some background, I am an international student doing their master's degree in management, so I'm very new to this industry that has already had a very rich history of on-site work and training. Concrete is fundamental to modern infrastructure, yet our current lack of standardized training practices could have issues in the future as well as the present. Many concrete workers do not require official training to begin their trade. This, when compared to other trades such as carpentry or bricklaying, shows a gap in concrete work that is not present within other trades. Today, we'll explore the existing challenges, review potential solutions, and discuss recommendations to improve the quality and safety of work while progressing into a new era of technology and sustainability. The concrete industry in Australia currently lacks the standardized training framework. While Certificate 3 in concreting is offered by TAFE, it provides foundation, its adoption is inconsistent across states. In addition to TAFE Cert 3, we have the Grey Card program, which is specific to New South Wales, which is mandatory on certain Transport for New South Wales projects. This training covers concrete work for bridges, concrete pavement base, and lean mixed concrete subbase. This, however, is limited to New South Wales and does not address the national need for standardized practices. The current training providers, as some examples, is Concrete, Cement and Aggregates Australia, who have various courses and a large library of resources available. Current courses that they're running in 2024 are Concrete Basics, Concrete Practices, and Agitator Rollover Prevention courses. Another training provider is the Concrete Institute of Australia, also known as CIA. They offer hundreds of training modules containing useful materials via e-learning programs. The Grey Card system is another one, which is state-specific, but this can also lead to fragmented training practices. There is a very large culture of on-site training in the concrete industry across Australia, the strengths of which are providing workers with real-world experiences that a training course could not. Many of the current training courses on offer integrate said on-site training. One flaw of this is the development of a more conservative mindset on the work site, where knowledge is being passed down, as well as a certain way of doing things. This could lead the industry to being more resistant to change and new technologies, which will make it more difficult for modern workers to adapt to said changes. Next up, we have the impacts. The lack of standardized training could lead to several issues. One such is quality concerns. Workers, if not properly trained and guided, can cause errors.
What are you laughing at?
Leading to structural integrity and safety issues. An example of this is when there isn't enough concrete between steel supports and the surface. This can lead to steel being exposed, which will then cause rusting, damaging the integrity of the structure. Economic costs. According to Oxford Economics, poor productivity in construction has cost the industry billions throughout the years. And lastly, personal costs. Inadequate training increases the risk of accidents and health hazards. Poor quality can lead to buildings being abandoned and the residents left without a home, as seen with the Mascot Towers case. Many who rely on infrastructure and housing can be impacted negatively. This can also reduce confidence in the market, which is an example of a knock-on effect. Another example of large-scale impacts in industry is in studies that have found that in New South Wales, over 50% of registered apartments have had defects. Moving on to new technologies. New technologies like geopolymers and 3D printing are emerging throughout concrete industries. Geopolymers, they reduce carbon emissions due to being activated by a material known as alkali. This poses a potential health hazard, however, as it has a very strong alkali with a pH level of 14, which is the most caustic levels. This could pose a health hazard to both workers and those nearby. Another material is 3D printing. This introduces IT components, which will necessitate new training and machine operation and digital model handling practices. Adding 3D printing machinery to work sites will require a more technical knowledge set on site to ensure the machinery remains operational. The current training is being provided by those that provide the machinery. This is another example of the decentralized training culture we have within the concrete industry. Both of these technologies highlight the need for updated and specialized training programs to ensure a smooth transition into the modern industry where Australia will be at the forefront of technological innovation. And next up, we'll have a small comparison to other countries. First up is Germany. They have a structured training system with strict licensure requirements for skilled trades, including concreters. This is covered in the Germany Crafts Act, which requires all contractors and business owners to acquire the Mastercraft certificate. An interesting comparison between both nations of Australia and Germany is that both are federal states with decentralized rule makers. Both countries have states have great autonomy over their own rules and regulations. Despite this, in Germany, there is a federalized minimum standard compared to Australia, where the states set that standard. In the United States, training standards vary state by state, just like Australia is federalized. But there are many established programs and certifications that could serve as a model for Australia. For example, the Concrete Institute of Australia has those modules, as mentioned earlier, but the US has ingrained those modules into a set of accredited training courses, mixed them together to ensure that workers and managers can choose to do it in a bundle, allowing them to have the proper certifications and training for the workplace. Next up are some industry insights I've acquired throughout these months of interviews. There's been a mention of increased need of formal training. This is especially true regarding specialized roles. There are challenges regarding how new materials such as slag and phage are introduced and maintained, as it is vital for geopolymers in the industry as well. There was an emphasis on the importance of the grey card, as well as the environmental and cost benefits of the FLAG and SLAG. More mention of gaps within the training industries. Another topic of discussion was the need for a structured inner training program to provide training support, as raising health and safety concerns within the industry as well. There was a mention of there being a general shift towards faster construction, a culture of on-site training practices, and impact of new technologies that could force change within the industry that many could not be prepared for. Decentralized training is the norm, even with officially recognized training. There is a need for specialized courses for new technologies. A mention of consistency in safety and protocols is required. There is an institutionalized training deficiency. Looking towards exploring American Concrete Institute modules for inspiration, how they merge them together for training courses could be an inspiration. Avoiding blame is necessary, though, to ensure worker cooperation with the changes, ensuring consistency and a standard of excellence throughout the concrete industry of Australia. And next up, we have the conclusion and recommendations. So based on my research, I recommend the following potential improvements to the concrete industry. Implement a standardized training program. Now, what could we do to look at that? So one of which is the grey card program, as mentioned earlier. Implementing that as a federal level across Australia could be an option. Another option could be a mandatory 6-month TAFE course. This could be heavily based on the existing Cert 3, so no much need for changes, but there could be updated modules to reflect the changing industry, such as introducing sustainability and technology courses. These steps could help align Australia with the international best practices and improve overall quality of concrete work and maintain that standard of excellence. In conclusion, standardized training in the concrete industry is essential for improving quality, safety, and efficiency. By adopting a comprehensive training framework and embracing new technologies, we can build a stronger, more resilient construction sector where Australia maintains said standard of excellence in this vital industry. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Jack. And what we might do is we might have questions all the way at the end of the session. So we'll ask you to come back and we'll have a little panel discussion at the end. But fantastic work. Really love your presentation. And I think it's brilliant to see all of the research that you were able to pull together very, very quickly to give us a good overview of what the sector looks like from a training perspective. So thank you. It's been wonderful to watch your work in this space. So for everyone online, we're really keen to hear from you what your thoughts are about the challenges and opportunities in this space. We have a little Mentimeter questionnaire that we're wondering if you could fill in while you're listening to the next presenters speak. You can do this at your own pace, so there's no need to wait for the questions to pop up. I would recommend, if you're watching the webinar on your computer, I would recommend that you grab your phone and look at this QR code on your phone. I think that's going to be the easiest way, because then you can go through the questions while you are listening on a separate device and not need to kind of swap between screens. So if you get a chance, bring out your phone, scan that QR code. That's going to take you through to menti.com. The code for this survey is 23779203. Bingo. Sorry, that felt like a little bingo moment. So yeah, pop the code in and start answering the questions. We were really keen to hear what your thoughts were on what Jack has just compiled and some of his recommendations and anything else you'd like to tell us. So it is my great pleasure now to introduce you to our next speaker, Catherine Featherstone. I'm really pleased to have you with us today, Catherine. Catherine is a Senior Manager for Products and Materials at the Green Building Council of Australia. She's worked in the construction sector for a long time, over 20 years, with a background in industrial and retail design. She's experienced firsthand the incredible waste caused by fit-out and construction practices and was spurred towards looking for waste reduction and less harmful materials. As Senior Manager for Products and Materials at the Green Building Council, she's a part of the effort to transform the way products and materials are produced and specified. She counts herself very lucky to work with a lot of stakeholders, including architects, manufacturers, and material experts, and is inspired by the incredible change already happening throughout the supply chain. And I think we count ourselves as very lucky to be able to work with you, Catherine. Catherine is currently finalising the GBCA's Practical Guide to Upfront Carbon, as well as developing the Responsible Products Framework. She also sits on the PCA's Circular Economy Working Group and the City of Sydney's Better Buildings Partnership, as well as the World Green Building Council's Circular Accelerator Steering Group. So Catherine, thank you for your time today. Over to you.
Despite everything that you've just said about me, Claire, I'm completely unable to present a screen. So I'm trying my hardest and I've practiced before we got on, but we'll get there.
I think this might be our fault if everyone's having that trouble. We will share your slides on your behalf.
If you could share them, I've got 2 screens and I don't know. It's not going to happen. That would be amazing. So thank you so much for joining me here and having me here today, everyone. As Claire mentioned, I am the Senior Manager for Responsible Products or Products and Materials at the Green Building Council of Australia. Our slides will come up soon, but I'll actually just start by telling you who we are. The Green Building Council was established in 2002. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We're a peak body for the built environment. Our primary goal is to transform Australia's built environment into one that's healthy, livable, productive, resilient and sustainable. Thanks, Claire. Could I ask you to move on to slide number 3? So what that looks like and what my focus is really around this supply chain and transforming the supply chain. The building materials sector accounts for 8% of Australia's emissions and has a massive value of $70 billion with a B per year. And it's the next step that we need to focus on to decarbonise our economy. We have so much in this space. Buildings are the places that we live, work, play, do everything in. 90% of our time is spent in buildings. So it's super important that we focus here. Next slide, please. This is another just impact, and I do speak quickly, so I'm just going to carry on speaking quickly because I think that these are such interesting numbers. 10% of our emissions come from materials and construction, 10%, and I'm sure with everyone in the room here today, you're fully aware of that. 50% of our resources are used worldwide for buildings and fit outs, and that is 42.4 billion tonnes a year. Again, another B. That's an insane amount of resources, especially when we're looking at a circularity rate of only 7%. I think 7% worldwide, starting to decline as well after COVID. So we really need to work on this. There we are. Worldwide at 7%. I think Australia's now at 3 or 4% from a CSIRO paper earlier in the year that was released. So I'm here to talk to you about net zero today. And how we can move towards it. Claire, if you could please move to the next slide. What's really important about net zero and where we are today is that we've all been focusing for a very long time and making sure that our buildings are operationally low in carbon. That is, that they're efficient, that the air conditioning works, the lights are operating efficiently, that we don't leave them on too long. And that's great. Also that we go off gas. So that's a whole other story. However, we're now focusing, and you've probably heard about it as well, we're focusing on embodied carbon. Now, if we look back to 2019, we had a pie that was 137 megatons of CO2 emissions, and that equates to 84% of what exists in the built environment, or 16% of, and 16% of that was embodied carbon, or upfront carbon. So that's the stuff that exists in what we build. So all of the cement, all of the aluminium and steel, every material that we put into a building, that's that 16%. As we move forward to 2050 and we're looking towards net zero, and net zero being nothing, inputs, outputs, zero, we get to a much smaller pie. So it's really important to note that we're now looking at 29 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions. So that's greenhouse gases, but we use CO2 as the proxy. We're now looking at 85% of those emissions are sitting in the products and materials that we have in buildings, and we're building those buildings now. So the focus that we have now is, one of the focuses we have is on reducing those upfront or embodied emissions. So if you're aware of the life cycle of a building, life cycle of a building, that it's scope 1 to 3 that we're concerned with, and 1 to 3 and 1 to 5 that we're looking at. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 1 to 3 and 1 to 5. I am right. I've had a very big day. So it is really important that we're looking at, before we even open the door, what are the effects that we can have on the built environment. So we released a paper last last year on how and where and why and what the upfront carbon is in buildings. Oh, sorry, if you don't mind going back up again, Claire. I just love this slide just with the pie chart. Oh, sorry, I think you guys are still, if you go to slide 6, that would be amazing. Thank you. So if you look at this slide, you can see that 13% of embodied carbon sits within the substructure and 42% in the superstructure. So there's so much that we can do in this space in reducing the upfront carbon in our buildings. Next slide. So if we look then at the practical guide for upfront carbon emissions, that's really, it's got a whole big bit at the front, which talks about the details and project level hows and whys and whats of reducing upfront carbon, but also then goes into more detail on some of the amazing things that Smartcrete are doing, and other across other sectors as well, looking at reducing the embodied emissions of products and materials. So it's a really important place and space for us. With regards to educating people on this is a terrible slide, but next slide, please, because I just threw it together. Please be aware that we always have training. So for contractors, for example, and how we're helping to educate and make sure that these messages aren't just coming from us and directly to developers or whoever is or project teams, whoever's seeking a Green Star rating. We're really engaging with contractors. So this Green Star for Contractors Buildings course, we work with the likes of Lego Rock and with Built, and they actually run that course for us and take that slant of what it is and why it's important and what it means for contractors on sites as well. So it's a really important course. There's a whole bunch of other courses which I've snipped here as well, which you'd be able to see. And actually, next slide, please. Part of that work also looks at the Responsible Products Program. So that's another focus on towards net zero. Next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. We are looking at, we have a Responsible Products Program at the Green Building Council of Australia that feeds into the the Green Star Buildings tool, version 1 at the moment, and it's being updated now as well. So some of these things are getting a little bit more stringent, but we have a calculator and database. We have webinars and masterclasses to talk about it. And we have a lunch and learn series as well for product manufacturers to help share some of the learns that we've had in this space. And what it means as well is that when it comes to sharing a lot of the information, a lot of the good stuff that's happening in this space, Green Building Council has developed this Responsible Products Program where we start to define what a good product is for the built environment. Back in 2019, when we had a look at our Future Focus program and what we're doing, we recognised there that while we have this amazing impact on the built environment and how it operates, we don't look so closely, and we've got a lot of space to start to impact on the materials. So this was born out of that. Currently, we recognise 31 different certification initiatives, third-party initiatives. We have 135 standards that sit under those 31 initiatives. There's more than 10,000 products available in our database and over 1,300 manufacturers as well. I have got my email address at the last slide. So if you do want to know more about this program, first of all, go on the website because everything that I've said about this ever is sitting on there. And second of all, you can always reach out to me. If you could please move to the next slide, Claire. So this is the Responsible Products Guidelines. We will be releasing these, launching them on our website towards the end of the year, but this is how we define a responsible product. So what we're talking about here today, really around what makes a product towards net zero, is looking at this positive space. So we look at the use of energy and reducing the use of energy, so less intensive products, ensuring that the sources are turning away from fossil fuels and gas where possible. And certainly we start looking at, in steel, we look at electric arc furnaces, and there's some really great changes there. We know that it's more difficult in this sector, and we work alongside a lot of industry leaders to try and recognise what's happening now and how we can roadmap with them and going forward. And also, we're not just focusing on that. Obviously, we've got these other criteria that sit around to really bolster that. We also look at reducing carbon emissions. So that's that upfront carbon, as well as the actual, well, these are the upfront carbon emissions that go into a building, and then the use of water. So ensuring that where possible, we go off potable water and recycle water in our manufacturing plants. We look at responsible, so that whole category that looks at how organisations are committing to climate and management of environment. Their capturing of EPDs and ensuring that they have EPDs, that they extract resources responsibly. So that one particularly is regarding how people work with traditional owners of land to ensure that they get free, prior and informed consent. And then we have other health and ingredients disclosures. We also look at health of both the occupants and the manufacturers to ensure that there are the right processes in place. And we're looking at circularity as well. And that's been a really exciting thing to work with Smartcrete on too. And we're certainly just constantly touching base, which has been really, really great. I have raced through. I think I'm relatively on time, but if you have any questions, reach out. I will happily share the link as well to our education page and the Responsible Products Program page after this. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that, Catherine. That was a fantastic overview, and I think sets such a great stage in terms of the conversation we're having today around how we really empower that knowledge transfer and the skills. Because I think what you've talked to there is obviously all the great work and the really exciting things that are happening through the GBCA, which is brilliant, but also a little bit about some of the complexities here as we start to think about a shift towards decarbonisation for that products and material space. So the fact that you're tracking tens of thousands of products within GBCA is awe-inspiring and perhaps a little frightening. So fabulous. Very pleased now to introduce you to someone who is very, very well known in the concrete sector. It's a great pleasure to have him as part of our community. Michael van Coverden is previous president of the Concrete Institute of Australia. He is a concrete technology and durability specialist and materials engineer. He's had a whole lot of experience working with concrete component materials. He provides a lot of really great strategic advice. At the moment, all really funneled through CQT services. Again, yeah, it's been absolutely fabulous having a great connection with you, Michael, and you've provided a lot of very sound mentoring to us at Smartcrete as we've dived into this space. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks for the previous speakers. We've had some excellent presentations so far. So hopefully you can see my screen, Claire.
Yes, fantastic.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Because I don't have a lot of time, I'll dive straight in. So when we talk about moving towards net zero, part of that is actually understanding what we're talking about with respect to sustainability. So sustainability means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that's from the United Nations. And net zero is cutting carbon to a small amount of residual emissions that can be absorbed and durably stored by nature and other carbon dioxide removal measures, leaving zero in the atmosphere. So they're measurable things that we want to get towards. And I want to talk about the practical side of measuring these things. So apologies if I'm looking to the side. I've got 3 screens running here and it just is the way it's set up, unfortunately. So how do we prepare for sustainable concrete? Well, we need to have a mechanism to validate the sustainable information that we get, that it's actually practical and it avoids what's called greenwashing. So what we don't want to have is advice that actually won't be supported by the sector because it just won't work or it just will cause other issues. So part of that is we must educate designers, suppliers, places with what is best practice in sustainability. There will be some changes they will expect with different materials, different processes, different expectations, and that needs to feed into a mechanism that can be sustainable itself. So not all concrete can be net zero, and that's because different parts of the project require different things. So we need to recognise that overall we want to work towards net zero, but there are some things that are going to be very difficult to get to net zero, certainly in the short term until we get net zero supply materials. So again, we must educate the people within that sector, the designers who will decide the way we need to head with respect to sustainability. suppliers who will need to supply to those requirements, and then the places who will need to handle this material that's going to have to be put into the structures that we are dealing with. So there are things that designers need to think about. They have government requirements or project requirements for embodied carbon reporting. And this is going to become more and more critical for designers because they have a legislative requirement. People like Transport for New South Wales have started to look at putting costs on carbon after 2045. And this was stated in a conference I went to where they said, engineering designs must perform and have net zero or limited embodied carbon footprint, and they're looking at $123 a tonne for CO2 was what was quoted after 2045. But again, Europe and other places might be at somewhere between $300 and $400 a tonne. So it's going to incentivise designers to say, well, we really need to work on options that can give us truly measurable embodied carbon reductions. So designers need to decide how they will achieve this. And there's very many ways they can do it, but they have to be careful because what can happen during a project duration, things can occur. What we can't do is put carbon-rich material back into a project to fix a problem that wasn't achieved by the poorly selected sustainable concrete or process. So we can make it worse, in other words. So we need to understand carbon, and that's part of what those graphics at the bottom of the page are talking about. So concrete as a material actually is a really good material for embodied carbon when you look at it across its cradle to grave. Now, this was quoted by someone, Karen Shrivner, very well-respected cement chemist, and she highlighted the fact that it's actually quite a sustainable material because it can also be reused. We can turn it into road bases, we can recrush it, use the aggregates in new concrete if we need to. There's things like that. We heard from Catherine just now about the Green Building Council. We've got Green Star, the ISCA, Infrastructure and Sustainability Council approach that we can also apply as designers. That all needs to be tempered with the right model. So if you're comparing how much embodied carbon you're reducing, you must have the right reference case. If it's a straight cement reference case, that does not represent what's being delivered to the supply sector at the moment. It needs to be, for example, a 25 to 30% fly ash reference case. If I can reduce past that to net zero, then we're all good. So that has to be realistic. And I think designers recognise that and need to recognise that. So what role can bodies play in achieving that? Well, the Concrete Institute of Australia, which I've had a lot to do with, is a professional association for members wanting to stay at the forefront of concrete research, technology, application, design and construction. They promote excellence in concrete, knowledge dissemination, professional development, industry collaboration, and have representatives on key bodies like Standards Australia. And the members, the largest member group are design engineers. So this is a really clever way to get to design engineers with well-prepared, well-verified information on sustainability and the deliverables of how we could get to that point. Greenwashing, as I said earlier, we can't just keep throwing supplementary materials into concrete and expect it to perform because it won't work for all parts of a bridge, for example. We may be able to get some parts of the building like piles, which have a low, in terms of they can sit in the ground longer for the construction program, but things like post-tensioning of floors can't always be achieved. Okay, there are things like activated slags like Envisia, which can do that, but to get that scalable across all projects relies heavily on the slag component and its ability to be available. Protocols such as MECLA, it's a really important tool that's been put together by bodies from the industry and from the construction sector. Look about how we specify low carbon concrete, what the EPD's environmental product declarations will contain. So we'll require verified EPDs, and we set carbon reduction targets within the supply chain. So in other words, we apply what's actually possible. I think that's the key thing here, is we don't get caught up in, oh, look, in theory, this is good and this is good. Yeah, but not scalable. It's not at the scale we need. We have vast amounts of concrete supplied every year, and we need to have a scalable solution. EPDs themselves, we have people like the Cement Concrete Aggregates Australia, who's the peak body for members who operate cement manufacturing, distribution, concrete batch plants and quarries. They provide stuff like circular economy, decarbonisation pathways, and they represent suppliers via EPDs. They're also looking to work on a standardised EPD for the industry. So concrete and quarry material suppliers, as I said, are cradle to gate, load and haul, aggregate crushing and screening, stockpile distribution, batching, but that's as far as it goes. It doesn't go to site because that's cradle to grave. So cradle to gate, the supplier EPDs only go to the supply gate of the supplier. So we need to make sure we understand that, and designers need to recognise that. They have their own EPDs. Here's an example of one supplier, Holcim. Boral have their own, Hanson have their own, but they talk about embodied carbon, as I said, cradle to gate, not cradle to grave. It's got to be really clear on that. So the places of these concrete have to recognise if we are using higher SEMs, you get lower early strength, higher later strength, extra curing needed, lower abrasion resistance on surfaces, and we may need post-tension stripping times. You can do things like geopolymers that were mentioned. They're good, but they're at a small scale. They have alkaline activators, which can be an issue, but also there are things like Invisio, which does work, activated slags and others. And again, this was reported 60% ZEP binder, 40% shrinkage limited concrete. It does work to a point, but again, I come back to scalability. I've rushed through Claire because of time, but the key thing for me is we need to understand what is valid sustainability information so that it's valid and it's workable for all levels of the chain. Bodies like the CIA, the Cement Concrete Aggregates Australia, can provide guided information at the levels in which they plug in. Concrete Institute at the professional engineer designer level, and CCIA can be at both levels, but in terms of industry documents and guides. And then under that, we can have a lot of other things. And there's also micro-credentialing, I believe, which we spoke about in a moment. Designers need to specify an embodied carbon limit based on what can actually be achieved. So the designers have to be connected with the suppliers to understand what can we actually achieve at scale across the full duration of the project all year round, because it can't be affected by the seasons. And as we know, the weather's changing rapidly at the moment. Remember, the embodied carbon is across the whole construction, not just at the commencement. So we can't have something that hijacks the total carbon footprint because we hadn't thought about that and we didn't have a backup plan. So again, designers have a big role here to play in what is our plan if we don't achieve these parameters within the time frame required for the construction plan. And variations may need to be using higher carbon materials. Just be careful of blowouts on carbon limits, which is possible. As I said, you could have a problem with a sustainable mix that requires a heavy carbon rich mix that ends up driving our carbon up, our embodied carbon for the whole project. So the key, I think, takeaways, we've got to track our carbon and remember that the government costs will bite along the construction chain all the way down. Recognise the role of those involved in the construction sector. The designer has a key role in dictating the market and dictating the construction. The supplier has to supply within the requirements that they have stated within the EPDs. And then the placer has to be able to be capable of placing that material, pumping it a long distance, finishing it at high-rise buildings through all different parts of the sector, but also recognise that things like changes in behaviour may be needed, longer curing times, and other aspects. So for me, that's as far as I can go today in my time allocation, Claire, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Michael. That was fabulous. And such a great point, thinking about this from the perspective of greenwashing, making sure that we're, really looking at that from solid evidence-backed information, that we're not, potentially going down the pathway of just sharing information that is not legitimate. And also, I think to your point around the cradle to gate and the way that we measure these things, there does seem to have been a shift in the policy discussions recently, really driving towards life cycle assessment as opposed to cradle to gate. And I know that there's been a lot of work done by neighbours in terms of what does embodied carbon mean. At the moment, their calculators are only going to track that carbon from cradle to gate through the use of EPDs. But I understand that they're going to have a voluntary life cycle assessment calculator actually included in their measurement systems when that release occurs. And so I think the transition to that conversation about cradle to grave is a really fantastic one that we're seeing. We can see a really fabulous photo that looks like Fiji, if that's your desktop, I believe. Giving me holiday vibes. Thank you. So thanks so much, Michael. Our last speaker today is Carly Cosmos, who joins us from the Institute of Applied Technology Construction. Carly is an accomplished vocational education training professional with over 16 years of dedicated experience in the education and training sector. She's leading the Institute of Applied Technology and Construction as the Senior Operations Manager for TAFE New South Wales. The Institute of Applied Technology and Construction is a New South Wales government initiative in collaboration with TAFE New South Wales, CPB Contractors and Western Sydney University, who we are also very proudly partnering with. And it's delivering micro skills and micro credentials to the construction sector. Carly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and just for that quick introduction, I won't be sharing any slides today. I thought I'd just have a chat in general, and happy to answer any questions. And likewise, for anyone interested, I will pop it in the chat at the end, just a connection through to the Institute of Applied Technology's website page, so you can have a look at some of the opportunities that we have on offer there. So the Institute of Applied Technology did come about by a VET review in the New South Wales government to look at a faster way of getting training to consumers. And it was decided to pilot this opportunity for the construction sector in particular, with our move to net zero, as well as the digital sector for the people of New South Wales. So what we've done is come together developing new courses in partnership at the table with industry, vocational education and the university sector. It's not done before here in Australia, so it is a very new initiative in that regard. We come together, we are working on where we have some skill shortages. We, as a team, look at what the requirements are. We listen very closely to industry, and industry also assist us in the development of this content. Speed to market for us, therefore, is roughly 6 months from the product inception to the delivery for our students that are enrolling with us. So it is based on the premise of the 4 Co's. So we co-innovate our new information and our training. We co-design the training, we co-deliver the training, and then we actually all work together. We co-locate as well. So it's a new model of training. It has been proving very successful. If you're located in New South Wales, we do have the benefit of current subsidies for New South Wales residents. So those courses are quite heavily subsidised as far as micro-credentials, starting at $180, normally $1,500 in this space. So just to speak a little bit about what is a micro skill and what is a micro credential, we have built these in line with the Australian government's micro credential framework. Micro skills exist as small bite-sized pieces of information on emerging areas. They are self-led. There are no educators in the room for this. And as a student works through a micro skill, they can form a decision if they're wanting to explore that area further. And from there, they can choose to enroll into micro-credentials and take a deeper knowledge in that space. We have a number of micro skills that are available Australia-wide and are currently fully subsidised. And really excited, we've actually had over 18,000 students come through and complete our micro skills with us at this stage. And for the construction sector, they're in areas of digital skills, which is particularly important to the conversation we're having today. They're in contract management, project management. We've launched one focused on women in construction, and there is also one on sustainability for construction. So we use them a lot with our high school students as well. We do want to help with that future pipeline, talent pipeline for the construction sector. And that's a really nice way for high school students to understand a little bit more about the construction sector to what they're getting typically in some cases from their careers advisors in high schools. And they do feature industry in the micro skills as well. A micro credential then is a deeper dive into a very specific skill set. It is delivered with an educator and they run over a period of 6 weeks. So you're educator led, you're with an educator for about 2 to 2.5 hours per week. There is a requirement for assessment at the end of your micro-credential. Students are encouraged strongly to do additional research and reading as well as part of rounding out their experience in that micro-credential. And on completion, these will stack into a university pathway, which at this stage for the pilot is with Western Sydney University. Our micro-credentials are proving very popular, very successful as well. We've had over 1,500 students come through our micro-credentials, and they're in the discipline areas of digital skills, contract management, project management, sustainability, and work health and safety at this point. And we're with additional product being delivered and dropping for us next year in this space as well. I think where we're different to your training packages, whilst they are Australia-wide and they do meet that requirement for regulation, micro-credentials can be built very quickly to address a emerging skill need or a skill gap area, and are a really good way of quickly rolling out training across an industry. So that's where there's the positive side of our micro-credentials. I think a couple of other things just that was highlighted to me to talk about from a talent attraction perspective here. We're really targeting upskillers and reskillers. We're also seeing quite a large intake of newly arrived immigrants, quite skilled immigrants coming into Australia that are looking to understand more of the Australian context as well. Significant engineers, designers, all sorts of background of experience coming through. Micro-credentials play a really good role there in helping them understand the Australian context and help to pivot them into the workforce. As I mentioned, the micro skills are fantastic for that pipeline and generating that pipeline interest. And just when we were talking about net zero 2050 just before there, Michael, as well, I was reflecting 26 years from now, how different the world will look. 26 years earlier was 1998. I was plugging my phone into the wall so I could make the computer join. And here I am now sitting talking to a computer completely wireless. So the moves and the advances that are happening in digital technology are only going to intensify. And just listening to you, Michael, talking about that monitoring and reporting, some of the courses we have in our digital skills area help manage big data, and that's going to be an important consideration. I know when I talk to a lot of tradies at Kingswood, they came into the trade because they wanted to work with their hands. They didn't like study, they didn't like computers, they just want to work with their hands. But the industry is moving to a place where technology will take over, and we are going to need to have the skills as well as the manual skills. So that piece of rapid technology change for the construction sector, I think, will be a challenge for us to overcome together, and that love of learning that we need to adopt with our young people coming through will be really important. And it's a great opportunity to embed some of this, particularly if you're bringing on your apprentices, getting them used to the fact early that there will be that requirement as they're progressing, I think is really important as well. So that piece on training is just demonstrating the future of training. For us, it'll be sharing some success stories as well, where we're seeing those changes happening, and then really building quality partnerships between education and industry to make sure that we are working in step together. So happy to answer any questions anyone has on our micro-credentials. We're just in between teaching periods at the moment. So we're updating our website, but I will make sure that I've shared that link in the chat as well. And I hope that's covered what you were looking for from us today, Claire, as well. So thank you for the invitation.
Thanks so much, Kylie. Really appreciate that overview. And I think it's a really nice dovetail to have the work that you're doing off the back of the conversation that Jack had and some of his recommendations about where these training materials might be provided, because it's clear that you're already creating some of those pathways, which is really great. And to your point about technology, it is really interesting. For anyone online who watched 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago and has heard of Contour 3D, they're really pioneering this space of 3D concrete printing, which might actually not mean that we have really any tradespeople on site at all. Instead, we might have robotics technicians, a very different generation of future constructors, which is really fascinating to think about. How do we train and engage those future employees? So thank you so much. I will ask everyone to pop back up in a moment and we can have a bit of a Q&A session with our time left. But before we do that, let's turn over to some of those results from our mentee session and some of the things that you shared with us in terms of pathways forward. So really interesting to see who is online here. It looks like we've got a few people from the design and engineering space, material suppliers, etc. But let's move forward to some of your answers and what you've told us. So in terms of the recommendations that Jack gave us around adopting a national training standard, introducing a national grade card system, and then mandatory TAFE courses, it's great to see that there's quite a lot of agreement with those. Interestingly, if we take a look at this mandatory TAFE course, you can see there in terms of the blip, there were also a few people that disagree with that as a potential pathway forward. And I think thinking about Carly's comments there around the reason why people might be coming into the trades environment, perhaps that might be a challenging one to then mandate that they need to do some kind of training. And if we move on, again, we had an opportunity for you to provide a little bit of feedback through some text comments. So thank you so much for your responses. The question was, what other challenges or opportunities have been identified which could block or could potentially enable improved concrete quality and consistency? So it's great to see that we're talking about things like training through QBCC, more general knowledge on carbon concretes, etc. That sustainability aspect, availability of materials and contractors, quality audits by third parties. And I think that really relates to what Michael was talking about as well around that certainty of information. Suppliers working closely with contractors, need to replace current developers and managers who haven't graduated. It's an interesting one. And also an interesting one in terms of thinking about where a lot of the training is directed at the moment. And it was great to see Michael talking there about the fact that engineers and designers are currently very well engaged through programs like the Concrete Institute of Australia. So that's a really fascinating one to think about. How do we actually make sure that those informed, educated people are leading our developers? This questionnaire will stay open for the next couple of days. So if you'd like to pop in some more feedback, you can always go to menti.com. The code is 23779203. We'll provide that again with the follow-up information that goes out after the end of this session, where we'll also share some of the information from the presentation. But Carly, Michael, Catherine, Jack, if I could ask you to come back on screen. Anyone who is joining us, please feel free to pop any questions that you have into the chat section. And we're happy to just have a bit of a Q&A session. I've got a question for you first though, Carly, noting Jack's comments at the start and his thoughts around pathways to training programs. What were your thoughts about the recommendations that he provided around national certification and then potential for mandatory vocational training for our concrete trades?
This is just my thoughts, not rounded with anyone else, but I find where you have regulation or licensing involved, that's where you have the game changer in uptake then of training. So a bit similar years ago when we brought out the in clubs and restaurants that you needed to have your alcohol service and you've done your training for that. It's the same concept. You need to have that government decision that this is a requirement moving forwards to get that mass uptake then of the training, moving forwards for us. So, I think there is a piece on this for regulation in this space that's probably worth further investigation. And I'm just saying that personally, because if you want that mass uptake and driving change in that space, I feel that is a good alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I was going to throw exactly to you next because you have direct experience in this space. So
yeah, so I'm a grade card trainer for bridges and pavements, and you're absolutely spot on, Carly. Because 50% of the participants who build bridges have to have a grade card to be able to build a bridge. So it is a game changer and it has made a huge difference. And feedback from transport is the quality of the workmanship has gone up. So the result is everybody wins. So I think Jack might be onto something there. If we can extend it more broadly, I think there'll be an overall benefit. I do at the end want to talk about AI, if I can, Claire, and about how important it is to deal with it. So if I can do it quickly now, we're going to get such a data surge like we've never seen in the history of construction. So this greenwash is going to be so critical to have a filter to filter out what is and isn't actually going to work. So we need to think very carefully about that, and it's just going to get exponential when we get AI. So
absolutely. And I think that is potentially a beautiful segue to a question for Catherine around how do we manage that volume of data? You were talking about tens of thousands of products that you're tracking. How are we verifying the and I suppose EPDs, there's a process that how are we verifying that sustainability data that's coming through your system that's allowing you then to provide those Green Star ratings?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good question. And we rely on third-party certification initiatives. So we don't rate products ourselves, but we rate the initiatives that rate the products. So we look for above those criteria, look for governance processes in place that they have to ensure that they're doing the right thing as well. And that all ladders up in Australia. So for Australian initiatives, that is guided by ACCC and how they grant the right grant license for those initiatives to operate. Greenwash is something that I didn't talk about and we didn't have a lot of time, but 31% of claims in Australia, so let me reframe that, only 31% of claims in Australia have got evidence to back up their claims. It is massive, this problem. We rely on people telling us what they do, and we rely on them telling the truth. I'm not saying that everyone knows what they're doing or knows that they're misstepping, but it is a real problem. And so if we're not informed, if we don't have the education or know where we can find the information, then that's where we fall off. So I would suggest that we need to really rely on those claims being backed up. And with regards to AI as well and EPDs, at the moment, I really feel like we're at the tip of the iceberg of what we can do, as we know. EPDs are currently being used just as a binary, have or have not. But as we see the UN Transparency Protocol coming into effect, we've got the deforestation regulation happening out of Europe. The data that we start collecting from products is all going to start to filter upwards because it's going to be used up the supply chain. And the requirements are going to become more and more stringent. So that education about what is required and by whom is going to become more valuable.
Yeah, definitely a space to watch. So Jack, last question for you. In terms of your engagement in this space, you obviously got to meet a whole lot of really fabulous people in the concrete sector and read up on some of the perhaps area challenges that are happening in our sector. Things like, you mentioned Mascot Tower. What's a takeaway for you in terms of how we can really empower the trades community to help us drive a sustainability initiative?
Place an emphasis on the responsibility and ensuring that they are properly prepared and trained for the changes that are going to be needed to be made within the sector, because we are seeing changes on an international scale moving towards sustainability. They're going to need training, and it's going to be if the current standard isn't changed, then we might just see a lot of people not be ready for that change.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael.
I've just got a comment on the accountability, Jack, which is right. So say we don't achieve an embodied carbon target on a project, accountability of how that was not achieved, rather than it becoming a big argument between parties that ends up in some sort of legal courtroom, it would be good to have a structure to say that there's a measured requirement and accountability for the parties involved in the construction sector. I think that's a smart way to look at it.
That's one of my core foundings as well, is the lack of centralization of the concrete sector in Australia. There isn't really that regulatory body that can basically decide this.
Yeah. Lots of opportunities for the future. We have just gone 1 minute over time, so we might wrap up the discussion there, but I'm really grateful that all of our panelists today have provided their contact information, so we'll be able to engage going forward if there are more questions. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us in this conversation today. It's clearly a space that we need to continue to focus on as we transition towards a decarbonised future. So yeah, thanks for your time and looking forward to seeing you at the next conversation.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone.